I'll have that noise canceling egg crate, so there you go.
We are live. Welcome to the Bradbury Challenge, the podcast where three writers attempt to write one short story each week. My name is Maya, and I am here with Gerald Hornsby and Chrissy Moss. How are you guys doing this week?
Good.
I can speak.
Yeah.
That's great. And Gerald looks like he's doing well. Before we jump right in, I have a huge announcement. Huge, okay?
But
yes, it's a huge announcement. So a lot of our listeners have noticed that the last few weeks, the podcasts have been coming out at random days, random times, whereas usually we used to try to get it out every Monday at 3 a.m. And that is largely because between me and Anais, we worked it out this weekend, and we are putting in 60 hours a month of audio editing. And it's getting to be a bit much. And so we went ahead and created a Patreon page so that we can hopefully raise enough funds to get an audio engineer in here to help us clean up these shows, get the shows out on time, and be able to produce new shows with amazing content. So if you guys are interested in supporting the podcast, go to patreon.com/literary roadhouse. It really is like it says. It's like in the olden days when arts had their patrons, whether you were a painter or a singer, people would come and give that artist money in order to promote their art and keep their art coming. And that's really what we're doing. We want to grow this podcast network. We have 3 new shows we're looking forward to producing. We want to have a literary journal in the future. And we would also like to be able to all of us get together in the same city and do a recording live in front of an audience. So if
that's crazy.
I know. Doesn't that sound like a blast? We're like, oh, can we get Gerald to New York? And I was like, Anais, I'm going to make Gerald get a tattoo. Watch. It's going to happen.
Oh, my goodness.
He's shaking his head wildly. So if you want to support us, definitely take a look. All of our goals are listed so you can see what we've got on the horizon, and every dollar helps. And so on that note, how did you guys do this week with your stories?
Okay.
Yeah, you wrote 2 stories, Gerald.
Like you're surprised. Why are you surprised? He does it all the time.
He finished his archetype concept, and
I will be surprised.
He has to come up with new ideas. Mm-hmm. So, Gerald, these 2 new stories, are they going to? Do they fit within the previous collection, or is it something new?
No, the first one I wrote was in as a result of last week's prompt, which was the file that just said remember on the computer. Mm-hmm. So right, and I wasn't that happy with it. It just sort of didn't seem to go where I wanted it to go.
With your story or with the prompt?
with the story.
Okay.
The prompt was fine, and I liked, my initial idea was fine, but then the writing just went haywire. So yeah, exactly 1 hour ago I thought I've got to write another one. So I did, and that one's much better.
I don't like this story, so I'm just gonna write a second one.
Yeah. Hey, that's not what I did last week, though. That's funny. So you wrote the second story in the last hour.
Yeah.
You are just such a badass, Gerald. Yeah. That's
overachiever.
Awesome. Yeah, totally awesome.
See, I won't be surprised unless Gerald comes to us and says, I did 5 stories this week.
True. Yeah. No. Even then, I think 5, I would be like, okay, it's Gerald being Gerald.
1 a day, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You mean you actually had a weekend, Gerald? Okay.
Yeah. How about you, Chrissy?
I am mostly finished with my story this week. So I have... Apparently, when I finish a project, which I just did, I get a little depressed.
That's normal.
I actually looked this up. I'm like, what? Why am I feeling bad? I just finished a project.
Why is this news to you? You've been writing for how long?
I know, but it happens all the time, and I'm like, is this normal? Because I'm prone to depression anyway. I know that I'm prone to depression, so I'm like, is this normal? And I looked it up, and it's actually a thing. It's called post-project depression. I'm like, wait, what?
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, so I need a new project. I need something that's going to spark some creativity, because working on the things I already had going wasn't doing it. I couldn't get into them. So I started something completely different. And I had this little 2-paragraph snippet of a story idea. And I just went with it, and I started writing a whole plot. So I have another novel that I'm going to write. And I wrote a short story to go with it.
That's excellent. Honestly, that's one of the best ways to get out of that post-project depression, is to start a new project. And I know a lot of writers, they will, as they're writing one novel, they'll be outlining another, so that they never allow themselves to go without a project. I try to do that, and it doesn't work for me. But
I do that. I have hundreds of, I have 2 specific projects that I have ready to go, and I have like outlines and everything for it. It's just I couldn't get into them for whatever reason. So
it is what it is.
Right.
For me, I wrote a poem this week, and it's funny. The short story part of my brain is the same part of my brain as the poetry part of my brain. So I have been not writing a lot of poetry for a very long time. I used to exclusively write poetry, and I stopped writing poetry. And I'm finding that the Bradbury challenge, writing these short stories, is making me write poetry again. And I'm looking at these poems, and I'm realizing that for me, they're short stories. And so I'm counting them.
I was just going to ask, is it telling a story?
Yeah, all of my poems are. I mean, poetry are really, really tiny short stories, or really, really long ones, depending on if you're writing like Gilgamesh or something.
The Iliad and the Odyssey are 2 of my favorite poems.
Exactly. And so, but I found that really interesting that as I've been writing more short stories, my poetry is being invigorated in a way that it hadn't been previously. It's like the same part of my brain or something. It's been very cool. So, did you guys have any challenges this week?
My children.
You're a mom. That's a given.
That's like sometimes it's worse than others, though. So
yeah, true.
And this week has been especially trying with the children. They've demanded a lot more attention. Greg, not so much, because he's been off doing his own thing, which is good. But the children, I've had to help them with various things. Like my son's like failing a couple classes, so that means I have to spend time with him doing homework. And my daughter has been trying to finish one class in for her high school diploma, so I have to help her too. So time management, I guess, would be the answer.
Yeah, time management is a big one. How did you overcome it this week? Because you got some writing done. So
I did.
How did you manage to work around those issues?
I found a way to, I started taking my laptop to work so that during my lunch, I can just write. Because I have half an hour that I am in the back room. There's no customers, no people, no children, and I could just write. It's only half an hour, but at least it's my time.
Yeah. How about for you, Gerald?
Yeah.
Did you have any challenges this week?
Yeah, again, sort of time. It's sort of logistical problems because I'm preparing for my annual road trip, so there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done to the van and to the preparations for that. So it's there's sort of chunks of days missing for doing various things. So that's at a time when I would normally write, I'm somewhere else. So that was a bit tricky, but apart from that, nothing much really.
Yeah.
Usual.
So when you're on this road trip this year, are we gonna be recording Bradbury challenges and getting jealous as you record from various parts of France, or are you just gonna leave it to the two of us girls to be by ourselves for 7 weeks?
Well,
those crazy Europeans. I don't understand this vacation thing they do. It's very odd.
Yeah, sorry.
Something called work-life balance. I don't understand.
Oh, gee, I know. This is crazy when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sorry. Yes,
not quite as crazy as Japan, but still crazy.
But we would love to hear you recording from like random coffee shops in the middle of various random cities all over the place. Just consider it. Just consider it.
Yeah, sure. I'll definitely try and see what I can do, because I'll have my laptop with me, of course. So I won't have
Oh, and then you could take your laptop and like show us.
Yeah.
So we
We
can get
all
you a little bit
loved
more.
following. Did you follow him last year when he went on his vacation?
No,
He
I didn't
had all
know
these
anything
pictures
about
that he put up. It was pretty awesome.
Didn't
So
even
I
know
hope he
Gerald
does that
last
this
year.
That's true. Yeah.
Gerald is pretty awesome. That's why he needs a tattoo, because anyone that awesome can't like be completely virgin skin. It's just not allowed.
Yeah,
There's
I don't
some
need a
rule in the
tattoo then.
universe.
I'm not awesome.
Yeah.
My challenge this week was nerves. I've got a lot going on, and when I have so much anxiety, it's hard for me to calm my brain in order to write. And part of that's just because, you know, I'm like got all these thoughts and everything racing. Part of it's ADD. But several things that are going on. This week I got rid of 50% of my belongings. And I'm working on getting rid of the other like 40% this week. And then me and my son are moving into, we don't know, because we've been looking. And so we don't know. Yes.
So I thought you were leaving.
I am leaving, but here's what's happening. I was planning on leaving the US in August, right? My son graduates in June. He goes to college in fall. This makes total sense.
Okay.
The landlord calls and says, we're selling the place. You have to be out the last week of April.
So you need a place to stay until August.
So of course I can't sign a 1-year lease anywhere. And where I live, nobody does month to month. So, and also it makes it harder for us.
And then he's staying at school.
Wherever we leave has to be close by, so we can stay at a school. So I can't find him a roommate situation elsewhere. So we're looking for a roommate situation. We may be stuck in a hotel for a couple of weeks because we found some people that I think will work really good for him once I leave. They're younger, they're hip. It's not like he's going to be stuck in like a house full of me's. You know, like, I want to get him a cool environment. Like, you know, I got to give my kid a solid. So, I mean, these guys seem really cool. There's one older woman that they're a gay couple, and they're like responsible and young, and you know, it's just a nice environment. And so, but they're not going to be able to move until like 2 weeks after we have to leave. So we have this going on. On top of that, I got waitlisted for Vona. Okay, so here's the thing. Vona is Voices of Our Nation's Arts, okay? It is the only multi-genre writers workshop for writers of color. It's huge. It was started by a bunch of writers, including Junot Diaz. Like, it is every writer of color like tries to get into this conference, and it is so hard to get in there. It's so competitive to get in. It's crazy competitive. Last year I applied and I just got a note that said, you didn't get in. This year I applied and I got a note that said, your application ranked really high. We really loved your writing. There wasn't enough space, but you're on a really short wait list.
Wow.
And I'm kind of kicking myself because this was the application where you have two options. You can say, I want to do this workshop or this workshop. And I put in for residency, but I only put in one option. If I would have put in a second option, very well, probably would have gotten in. So, and the option that I picked was to work on my novel with David Mura. And so I'm just like, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. All week. I can't breathe. I haven't hardly eaten anything. I'm just a wreck until like I find out the space that opens up. Just a mess. So that's been my week. And it took me a little bit to like calm my brain enough so that I could get out some words. And when I did get out some words, the poetry, I think because I've written poetry so much longer than I wrote fiction, like I've been writing poetry since I was a child, that whenever I stop writing for any reason, poetry seems to be like the first thing that comes back. It's like swimming. It's like breathing and eating. Like that's how my brain works. I narrate things as I walk around in the world. Like I'll walk down the street and I'll be like hearing poetry and words in my head. It sounds a little crazy, but okay. We'll go with that. I am. Next topic. I hold no illusions about myself. So it is the first thing that comes back. And that was definitely true this week.
Very good.
Have you guys ever gone to a writer's conference that was really just focused on craft rather than you know, a lot of writers' conferences, this is how you get an agent, and you know, those types of things. Have you ever been to one where like you're literally just focused on improving your writing?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I went to one last year, which was specifically aimed at crime authors, and that was very, very good, very, very good. There were some talks from sort of famous British crime authors, but there were a couple of sessions I went to where it was sort of 1 to 10, 12 students. And huge insights, huge practical information and guidance, and you sort of do some work, and they give you advice on that, and so it was totally worth it.
Yeah, I went to one last year. I went to the Napa Valley Writers Conference, and I think that is a really good first conference because it isn't as intimidating and it's smaller, and everyone is like, there's a lot of really established writers that go there, but then there's a lot of like newer writers that are just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited. And I was definitely one of those. And what I liked about it was the way it was set up. We submitted our work in advance, and so we had a month to read. Everyone was split up into little workshops, and so the month prior, everyone would read each other's works and write notes on each other's works. And then during the workshop, in like, depending on whether you're a morning or afternoon session, there was lectures when you weren't in session. And then when you were in session, you workshopped each other's work. And there was a person facilitating, and the facilitators, the workshop leaders, were some of these amazing, talented people in writing. And so I had so much fun. And I must say, the poets seem to be having more fun than the fiction writers. The poets, their system was a little different. So they actually had to write new poems every single day. They were all a little frazzled, but you get a bunch of poets that are like all a little frazzled, and they were partying hard, and they were like having so much fun with words and language. And I spent a lot of time listening to the poetry lectures when the schedules didn't conflict. And I learned just as much from listening to the poetry lectures as I did from listening to the fiction lectures. And that's the other thing I like about it for like a conference, because you get that exposure. I think even if you don't write poetry, hearing how poets edit words and hearing how they choose language is really helpful when you're writing fiction. And so that was like huge for me. It was an absolutely huge pivotal moment for my writing.
That's why I like going to NorwestCon and RadCon, just because you have so many different panels and they're on so many different things that you can get so many just information that you never thought you would be using. Like I attended a couple of sessions on fighting, where they had live demonstrations and we could participate and learn how Roman legions formed their shield walls, or how the Vikings formed their shield walls, which were completely different. And then I attended another one that was on herbalism and how you can cure different or help suppress different problems in the body with different kinds of herbs. That was really interesting, and I write about that kind of stuff in my stories. So
yeah, especially because when you're writing fantasy,
yes,
there's so much world building. And so one of the things that makes, like, for me, I don't read a lot of fantasy, but when I do read fantasy, there's very specific things that make me appreciate that story and allow me to get sucked in. And one of those things is there's enough real world elements that cements and grounds the world, so that the world feels real. So it doesn't completely feel like it's out of left and like people are still acting like people. They may be on another planet, they may whatever, but they're still doing things that people have been doing for centuries. You know, the conflicts, they may be, you know, conflicting in some post-apocalyptic world, but the way they're approaching conflict in politics feels familiar because we've been doing the same thing again for centuries. And so when you're able to do, I can see how finding out how they built their walls and everything when they're like fighting and like blocking each other would be really helpful.
Well, especially since I have always had problems writing fight scenes. That gave me a bunch of like insight into. They actually had one panel that was just fight scenes for authors, where you could actually say, this is what I was thinking, and they could demonstrate it for you and show you how like two weapons together would work, or you know, opposed to each other, or how two people against one person would work, or you know, things like that. It was so cool. I video recorded it.
And seeing the demonstration is, I would think that seeing that demonstration would be much more instructive than reading a book on how to write a fight scene.
And when you're actually doing it, so you realize that an actual fight between two people who know what the hell they're doing doesn't last very long. It's like maybe a minute at most. But if you have two people who one person doesn't know what they're doing and one person does, it's over in seconds. So you're trying to make this thing into an interesting part in your story, which becomes difficult. And
I think that's why it's badly done so often.
Well, that's why I usually skip over the fight scenes in most stories, because they're boring.
And in stories with bad fight scenes, a lot of times I won't even finish the book.
I'm really good at skimming.
You know, there are certain books. I'm not much of a. I'm kind of like that. There are certain things that will turn me off from a story, and a good fight scene will just sink me right into it. But a bad fight scene turns me off entirely because it yanks me out of the story.
See, I don't read sex scenes either. I just skip over most of them because the
bad sex scenes will turn me off too.
And
you know,
it's
I was
not
just
that they're
thinking
bad.
It's
just that I'm not interested. I'd rather go have it myself than read it in a book.
I think most sex scenes are bad. And I was thinking this as you were talking about the fight scenes. That the most commonly badly written scenes are fight scenes and sex scenes.
True. That is quite true.
I mean,
and I think Gerald's turning red.
That we would be able to do that. You know, we watch fighting. I'm not even going to finish that.
Gerald, what is the worst written scene that you've seen in a book?
I don't. I think it must be sex scenes. They're very rarely done well, and I tend to gloss over them. I tend to sort of think, you know, I prefer to.
Why do you think they're done badly? Like, what is it about them that usually is a red flag that this is bad?
Because you don't need all the detail. I think, you know, I prefer, maybe I'm just an English prude, but I prefer to just sort of, you know, have the initial whatever, the kissing, whatever, and then I
fade
close
to
the
black.
door. I close the door and let them get on.
Let them do their thing and open it up in the morning.
I don't think I've ever written a sex scene, and I don't think
I've tried.
Oh, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've read them. I've read some really good ones.
Right.
And I think that's why I'm so critical of them. The first sex scene I ever read, this is the kind of kid I was. Okay. I was watching MTV and they had this quote that sounded amazing. It sounded passionate and wonderful. And it would flash really quick at the end of this commercial for MTV, and I could never read it. And so I spent like a year and a half squinting at the TV, trying to figure out what this was.
Before DVR.
And 3 years later, I found it. It was the quote from The Hungarian Adventurer, which is a short story in Aeneas Nin's Delta of Venus. And when your first exposure to literature that explicitly and erotically discusses sex is written at such a high level, it just, like, it's really instructive. And for me, I think most writers, they default one of two ways. I think it mostly bad sex scenes comes from being uncomfortable talking about sex and being uncomfortable writing about sex. Because if you can't talk about it, you're not able to write about it. Like, you've got to have a little bit of just freedom, emotional freedom, to be able to put that on the page and have it feel real. And I think because they're uncomfortable, they either fade to black, which most people would prefer. If you're uncomfortable, just fade to black. Like, just admit to yourself, I can't do this, it's over. Or they default to doing like stage blocking. Like, that's what Gerald is like. You can practically like see the diagram. It's like, okay, the leg went here, and the heaving bosoms over here, and that does not make for engaging literature. Whereas the writers who I feel like are completely comfortable in their own sexuality and in other people's sexuality, they're able to combine the emotional aspects and the physical aspects in a way that's artistic. And I don't think most writers are capable of doing that. Plus, because most sex scenes are bad, most writers, when they realize they have to write one, they go out and try to read a bunch of sex scenes, and then they read a bunch of bad sex scenes, and then they're just replicating bad writing.
So I think when you're having sex, you're not doing it, like you said, blocking it out, where you're not thinking of every single move and every single action that's happening. That's how I write my fight scenes, is I don't sit there and block every single freaking movement, because when you're in the middle of a fight scene, you're not paying attention to every single movement. You're like swinging and blocking and dodging and trying to get the fuck out of the way. Sorry.
It's okay. We're already explicit at this point. Like this
episode we're talking about sex. Yeah. So
we're talking about sex scenes. Sorry, I said a bad word. Like,
oh my god. But anyway, so you want more visceral, I guess, more fluid. That was a bad choice of words.
Yeah.
but more. You don't want, blow by blow. You want.
That's a bad choice of words. Move on.
Action by action, you want more of a continuous flow of wordage. Words, not actions. I'm gonna stop there.
You realize how many words in the English language can go nowhere good very quickly when you try to
most of them.
And I think one of the things is because people aren't comfortable. They go into this step-by-step instructions, and you're right, we don't do that. And if you write sex the way people have sex, it's actually quite confusing, because there are moments in sex where time is shifting, time is going fast or time is going slow, and you're not necessarily feeling things, you're tasting things, or you're hearing things, or whatever. And to be able to combine all those elements as a writer, and then you sit back and you read it and you're like, where's the leg? I don't understand. And so then you overcompensate. And it's okay. I actually like those scenes that have a little bit of that confusion and ambiguity. One of my favorite sex scenes is a young couple who are having sex for the first time, and they're so uncomfortable. Like, it's so sweet because the guy is a nervous wreck, and it feels so real. It feels really, really real. And honestly, when I revise that book, that's probably going to be the only scene that doesn't get significantly changed, because when you read it, it feels really real. And it's because there's a lot of emotion. The time does shift. You have to use all the senses when you're writing sex scenes. You just have to. Right. If all you're talking about is touch, you're ignoring what sex is about. And I don't know. That's hard for some people to do. Right. That is really hard for some people to do. Unlike writing, unlike fighting, where you can sit down and watch a fight, and if most people sit down and try to watch sex, what the sex they're watching is usually bad and acting.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if there was some way to watch like actual humans that are actually
actually have sex,
and that would probably be good for writers, because the difference is kind of large. Chrissy, stop your snickering.
I think also, I think when you,
this is the most awesome conversation.
When you write a scene, that isn't sex or fighting, so you've got a scene in the house and people move out, you don't say, Bill walked over to the sideboard and picked up a glass and then walked back and then sat down on a chair and put the glass on the table. You don't need to say all that specific stuff. It's more important, why did Bill walk over to the sideboard?
Right.
What's the glass doing? What's the problem? So and for me, it's the same with the sex scenes, and I think it's more important what the two characters are, and whether they're having consensual sex, whether it's love, or whether it's something else, or whether it's why are they having sex, and
Same with
that to me that's more important than the physicality of it.
One of the things that you just said that really struck with me is, when we write a book, it has an arc. There's an arc of change that happens either in the character or in a country or whatever, but there's an arc of change. The end of the book is different from the beginning of the book.
Mm-hmm.
When we write a short story, it's the same thing. There's this change that happens throughout the story, whether it's in the character and the emotions or whatever. There's usually some sort of change, and if there isn't, then you finish the story and you're like, why did I read that? And exactly. And when I write chapters, there's an arc within each chapter, and when I write scenes, there's an arc within each scene. That's something that I do personally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if most writers do. I think most
do. Most good writers do.
I think even if you don't do it on purpose, like when I read good scenes, there's usually an arc. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I find with sex scenes and fight scenes, a lot of times it's missing that arc. And so it's like, why is the scene here? Like, what is different at the end of the sex scene than at the beginning of the sex scene? And how did these people get there? And I think when you break it down like that and you ask yourself, why are these people doing this? Why are they fighting? What is going to be different at the end of this fight than what we walked into this fight? It can help you figure out what those other elements are a little easier, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think so. So we're all agreed.
So is this one going to be titled the top discussion about bad sex scenes?
Yes, sex and fighting scenes. So we are already at the 38-minute mark. It didn't feel like it went that fast. This was a really fun conversation. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and hear some of what we wrote this week. Who wants to go first?
Maybe Gerald shouldn't.
Because all his writing is awesome?
Yeah.
Okay, Chrissy. You spoke up. You go first.
Okay. She said, I don't perform those kinds of services, she said, her eyes narrowing, eyebrows furrowed. Those kind? You mean, no, he protested. That's not what I'm after here at all, Miss Blake. I just need a lucky charm. I heard you were the one to do it. A lucky charm. He had the decency to look bashful, his cheeks turning up rosy pink. I seem to have fallen on a bit of bad luck, and I need something to help me win. She stood straight, her hands on her hips. Are you a gambler, Mr. Rogan? Don't say it like that, he said. Gambling's a fine test of skill, and I have quite a bit of it. I've won games all up and down the Mississippi on every steamship on the water. I've even been over to Carson City and Reno a time or two. If it's all skill, then why do you need a lucky charm? It isn't all skill, he said. Just a great deal of it. But sometimes luck plays a big role, and if your luck's on the downturn, well, you need a little help. There you go.
Good for you.
Very good.
Where's that story going? I'm curious.
It's actually a steampunky one. That's the short story that's coupled with the novel, and in the novel, she's a Creole lady from down southern areas, and she is a white witch who does white magic, and a black witch is sabotaging her because she doesn't like the fact that she's been undoing her curses. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Carol?
Okay, this week's I'm going to read from the thing I wrote a little while ago, and it's actually based on sorry, just a little story. I went back onto Kindle boards because there was an interesting conversation on there, and I hadn't been on there for a year or more, and I realized my profile had a book cover for a novel that I hadn't finished, and so it sort of brought it to I've got tons, so it sort of brought it to the fore, and I thought, yeah, maybe I should do something. So this is a sort of short story based on that. Gil checked the clock. 1 minute 40. His eyes roamed around the walls of the booth. Interesting stuff, Granite. damn tough stuff to work, which is why they had to use so much C4. They were getting near to the end, to the time when this hole in the ground was big enough and deep enough to store whatever it was they wanted to store without it coming to the surface again. Just like taking a dump in the backwoods, Carver had said. Wherever it was they were going to bury, he would make sure he was long gone before the shipments began arriving. His daydream was rudely interrupted by the 1-minute klaxon. Damn thing gets me every time, he muttered as he keyed the switch on the walkie-talkie. Harpenden, 1 minute, safe to proceed? Hey, Gil. Affirmative. Proceed. It was a strange kind of silence down here during the final minute. Other seniors talked about it. The dead minute, they called it. The countdown was on. Nothing he could do to stop it now. And the silence absolute. At other times, even in the protected control booth, with thousands of tons of granite between him and the 30 kilos of C4, there would be sounds, distant machinery noises, sometimes a shout between workers, a hum of electricity. But now, with glance, 23 seconds to go. There was nothing, no sound. It was dead. He even slowed his breathing, making it shallow. Any sounds emanating from him would spoil the absolute nothingness of it. The klaxon, sounding at 20 seconds, was different. That had never happened before. He looked at the trigger control, but it showed primed and ready. The klaxon sounded again, then again. 18 seconds. What the... Mike, have they changed the system? I've got the klaxon going off. There was no response. The klaxon was now sounding every second. It had changed from a gentle, worked by the protocol reminder to something else, to a warning, an alarm. Hey, Mike, you there? You got any idea what's happening? There was a hiss of static between the bursts of noise from the speaker above his head. Hey, Mike, you there? 14 seconds. This is Harpenden. Something's wrong. I need you to abort the blast. Please confirm. The klaxon was silent. Gil held his breath. The noise had done, but it wasn't dead. There was the static from the radio. He released the switch. 9 seconds. Harpenden, you need to abort now. There was a noise from the speaker, not static. Someone was at the microphone. Gil could hear breathing. Mike, that you? 4 seconds. Sorry, Gil. 3 seconds. 2, 1.
That was so nice. Oh my goodness. And I like the countdown aspect. It reminded me of that story, Eminence, that we remember when we read Eminence on Literary Roadhouse, and how it had the countdown to, it definitely reminded me of that. But it also had like this, it was very like a masculine sound. I think your voice is getting so much stronger, and I can hear the influences of the writers that you covet, but at the same time, your stories sound more and more quintessentially you. Yeah. And so, good work, Gerald. Very good work.
Different this week,
Yeah. I don't think I've heard anything like that from you before, and I really enjoyed it. This poem is called The Touch. And I need to go through it because I'm almost embarrassed to read this. You get ready to read something, you're just like, really? It's not ready. But, our listeners wanted to hear us writing each week. So here you go. Ask and you shall receive. Yeah. Be careful what you ask for. It's called The Touch. The voice brings light, illuminating paintings on the walls. Sometimes, in the quiet of dawn, the paintings speak, telling tales of angels and devils fornicating on the dawn of time. Fair good creatures chasing the touch of evil's hand. One touch the angel begs, please, just one. A hand singes her soul as she kneels at the devil's feet. Warmth tingles through her body. Darkness fills his own. While in the space between their touch, a heart beats loudly.
Wow.
And so that is my poem.
Wow.
And I need to edit it and get it up on the website because I haven't put up a name in a while.
There you go.
So,
that's really
nice.
There
we go.
I'm not. I don't like.
You don't like poetry?
No,
Did I just hear you say it's really nice?
Yeah, it was really good. It was. I don't know. There's something about it. The sort of lyricism and the choice of words was really good. I enjoyed that. Okay.
I'm gonna cry.
It wasn't as bad.
My life is complete. No, that's a huge compliment from you because I know you don't like poetry.
And you were sitting there worried about it.
Makes me squirm.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, and we need a writer's prompt. Does anyone have one this week?
I have one if no one else does.
Sure.
It's just
Gerald.
a quick scene. You've just moved house and you open a cupboard to find a bloody knife. That's it.
Ooh, I'm on that one.
Really?
I'm on that one. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Like instant story just popped into my head. That story's all mine.
Write it down today.
Wow. Yeah.
Excellent job. Okay. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this week's Bradbury Challenge. And if you enjoy this show, please head over to the website and check out the show notes and let us know what you like about the show, what you think could be improved. You can find all the information about the Bradbury Challenge as well as all of our other shows at www.literaryroadhouse.com. And if you want to support this show and help make this show possible, please visit. I'm going to redo that and cut it out. And if you would like to support this show and all of our shows and continue to help make those shows possible, as well as contribute to our ongoing goals of creating a literary journal and having some live shows, please visit www.patreon.com/literaryroadhouse. I wonder how long it's going to take me to be able to say that smoothly.
That's a lot of words.
Yeah.
It's a lot of words. Okay.
Stop.
And now I'm going to unlock the seat. I'm going to